The studio lights were merciless, shining down with a clinical intensity that made every movement, every gesture, impossible to ignore. Jasmine Crockett sat with perfect composure, her posture straight but relaxed, projecting an air of quiet authority. Across from her, Melania Trump's defense team shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their carefully rehearsed lines ready, but Jasmine had already dismantled the calm facade of the interview space. There was a palpable tension in the room, the kind that made the audience lean forward instinctively, sensing that something was about to happen that could not be unseen. The cameras rolled, catching every glance, every pause, every inflection that carried weight beyond the words themselves. Jasmine began her examination with a deliberate calmness, the kind of voice that draws listeners in, compelling them to focus on what is being said. She didn't need theatrics or dramatics, the power lay in the precision of her words. She spoke about contradictions, citing public statements that didn't quite line up, moments in interviews that had been carefully edited or sanitized, narratives repeated so frequently they had begun to sound like facts. There was a rhythm to her questioning, a careful layering of observations that built like the tension in a symphony. Each point was placed intentionally, almost surgically, highlighting how certain narratives had been accepted without question, while the reality behind them remained obscured. Melania's defense team tried to respond with rehearsed assurances. They spoke of privacy, dignity, and the misinterpretation of public actions. Their words were polished, articulate, and familiar, yet, somehow, the more they spoke, the weaker their defense appeared. Jasmine didn't rush, she let their points hang in the air, allowing the weight of inconsistency to become evident. Each word from the defense was met with subtle but sharp follow-ups that exposed gaps, contradictions, or moments where facts didn't quite align. The audience watched, captivated, as Jasmine skillfully turned the conversation from defensive platitudes to a genuine examination of accountability and truth. The beauty of her approach was in its restraint. She didn't raise her voice, didn't shout or demand. Instead, she spoke with a clarity that forced attention. In those moments, the studio felt less like a controlled environment for debate and more like a courtroom, where reason and evidence held the final authority. She highlighted instances where public statements seemed incongruent with documented behavior, connecting seemingly unrelated moments to reveal patterns that had been overlooked or ignored. It wasn't personal, it wasn't cruel, it was precise, methodical, and impossible to dismiss without careful thought. As the minutes passed, the tension in the room increased, though Jasmine's demeanor remained calm and deliberate. The defense attempted to regain control, reiterating familiar lines about intention, context, and perception. But the meticulous structure of Jasmine's questions and observations left little room for evasion. Each response felt measured, not confrontational, yet it carried the undeniable force of logic. It was as if she had laid out a complex puzzle, and no matter how beautifully one might cover the pieces, the image was slowly becoming unmistakably clear. The audience could sense it, the tension radiating from the defense, the subtle shifts in posture and hesitation, tiny cracks forming in a shield meant to appear impenetrable. Then came the pivotal moment. Jasmine paused deliberately, giving space for the defense's words to settle, before delivering a single, concise observation that reframed everything that had come before. It wasn't a bombshell revelation in the conventional sense, but a moment of clarity that cut through layers of narrative construction. She pointed out, with calm exactitude, how carefully constructed images and statements, no matter how polished, could collapse when confronted with their own inconsistencies. The defense team's response faltered, the well-rehearsed lines lost coherence. Eyes darted, breaths hesitated, and the weight of the moment became undeniable. The room, once filled with the controlled rhythm of debate, shifted into something more visceral, more revealing. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, it was undeniable. In those seconds, the armor of scripted defense cracked. Jasmine had done what few could. She had created a space where truth demanded to be seen, where narrative could no longer hide behind repetition and polish. The audience, both live and at home, would later replay the moment, debating, arguing, and reflecting. But at that instant, there was no need for commentary or sensationalism. The power of clarity, the quiet force of reason, had spoken for itself. Within the confines of that studio, the conversation had shifted irrevocably. What had started as an ordinary interview had become a profound moment of reckoning, leaving everyone present with the unshakable understanding that sometimes the most powerful truths are not shouted, they are simply placed where they can no longer be ignored. The moment Jasmine Crockett's words landed, the atmosphere in the studio changed. It was almost tangible, a shift from performance to reality, from rhetoric to reckoning. Melania Trump's defense team, who had begun the interview confident in their prepared statements, now sat frozen, trying to recalibrate in real time. Every pause, every fleeting glance across the table, betrayed the internal scramble. The camera captured it all, the subtle signs of unease that no scripted answer could hide. Jasmine didn't press immediately, she allowed the silence to stretch, letting the weight of the conversation settle, letting the audience absorb the clarity she had just delivered. The silence spoke louder than any argument could. Viewers at home were riveted. Social media erupted within minutes, the studio clip shared across platforms, sparking debates and hot takes. Clips of Jasmine's calm dismantling of the defense went viral almost instantly. Experts weighed in on the nuance, dissecting the questions she asked and the way she exposed contradictions that had been carefully glossed over. Some applauded her precision, noting how rare it was to witness such a methodical approach that relied not on theatrics but on logic and evidence. Others criticized, arguing she had overstepped, or that she framed questions in a way that made it impossible for the defense to respond adequately. The conversation was unavoidable, dominating online discourse for hours, even as news outlets scrambled to contextualize every statement. In the studio, the defense team attempted to regain composure, but the effort was visibly strained. Their responses, once smooth and confident, now felt reactive, defensive in a way they hadn't anticipated. Every sentence seemed to require more justification than it had seconds before, and the audience, both in the studio and at home, could sense it. Jasmine remained poised, her demeanor unshaken. She continued to ask pointed, but measured follow-ups, each question carefully designed to clarify rather than accuse, to illuminate rather than attack. The brilliance of her approach lay in the balance. She never raised her voice, never let emotion dictate her pace, yet each word carried undeniable weight. The tension built as she moved through the discussion, seamlessly connecting public statements with documented actions and widely circulated accounts. She demonstrated, without hyperbole, how perception had been curated, and how narratives had been allowed to dominate reality. By the time she circled back to her original observation, the impact was magnified. The defense's carefully maintained facade had further deteriorated, their talking points repeating but failing to land. Jasmine's calm insistence forced acknowledgement of contradictions that had long been ignored. It was subtle, yet the effect was seismic. Within minutes, a room that had felt controlled and professional now seemed fragile, almost suspended in the uncertainty of what had just been revealed. As the segment progressed, the conversation expanded beyond the studio walls. Pundits dissected every nuance on morning shows, podcasts replayed her lines, and journalists analyzed the shift in body language and tone. News outlets highlighted the fact that the defense, despite experience and preparation, had crumbled not due to aggression or confrontation but due to precision and clarity. Commentators emphasized that Jasmine's approach demonstrated the power of methodical questioning, showing how careful reasoning could unravel even the most polished defenses. It became a case study in public discourse, in accountability, and in the undeniable force of truth delivered with composure. Even those initially skeptical began to acknowledge the impact. Critics admitted that, despite disagreement with her conclusions, Jasmine's ability to present evidence and highlight inconsistencies was impressive. Viewers who had previously dismissed parts of the narrative found themselves reconsidering, forced to weigh facts against perception. The defense team, meanwhile, was left in a precarious position, no longer just defending statements, but now grappling with the visibility of contradictions exposed in real time. The cracks in their narrative were no longer theoretical, they were documented, witnessed, and widely discussed. By the time the interview concluded, the impression was indelible. Jasmine Crockett had not just challenged a narrative, she had redefined the terms of engagement. The conversation that began with carefully rehearsed defenses ended with the undeniable assertion that truth, when presented methodically and clearly, is hard to escape. As cameras cut away, the studio remained silent for a moment longer than usual, the kind of silence that speaks of collective recognition, of witnessing a rare moment where reason and clarity triumph over image and rhetoric. Outside the studio, across social media and newsrooms, the echoes continued. The segment became a reference point for discussion, analysis, and reflection, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful victories are won not with volume or aggression, but with the quiet, relentless pursuit of clarity. In the end, the fallout wasn't just about the immediate debate, it was about perception, accountability, and the enduring impact of truth revealed in its purest form. Within seconds, Jasmine Crockett had shifted a narrative, challenged defenses, and left both the studio and the public reconsidering what had long been accepted. In those moments, the armor of image crumbled, and the unspoken lesson was clear: clarity cannot be rehearsed, and truth, when placed in the right light, will always find its way forward.